Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Iara Bruz, and I'm glad to be here in this conference sharing my presentation. Dr. Gustavo Moura was not able to make it, but he really helped to write and to build this presentation with me. I'm talking from South Brazil, Curitiba, and our presentation is entitled English Teacher Education POS Method, a Transnational Perspective to Classroom Practices. First of all, I will talk a little bit about teacher education, then the POS method, English as an international language in this context, transnationality and implications to the classroom language, classroom and post-pandemic context. So the classroom context has interrelated aspects. We have to think of contents, student-teacher relationship, the institution that the teacher and the students are in, and we can discuss all these interrelated aspects when we talk about the POS method theory. So when we talk about teacher education, we need to keep in mind that it is an ongoing construction. These three parameters of particularity, possibility, practicality, along with the macro strategies that Cura Maravilhoso writes about, operate the principles that can guide practicing teachers in their effort to construct their own situation-specific pedagogic knowledge. So teachers are after building their own knowledge every time they enter a classroom. We can say that teachers are never totally ready to be a teacher. So every classroom, every group of students that they meet, it is like the old teacher needs to rebuild himself or herself. So the POS method brings three parameters: particularity, possibility, and practicality. And we can think of these parameters when we talk about pre-service teacher education and in-service teachers education. They're also at the same time reflecting on how they were when they were students. Everybody who becomes a teacher has already been a student. In-service teachers building their theory when they enter the classroom. So we're going to talk a little bit about these three parameters from Kumara. The first one mentioned here is particularity. So particularity thinks of a particular group of teachers teaching a particular group of learners. So every time there is a classroom, this group is particular. There is no other group that's going to be the same as the group that the teacher is in front of. Particularity also aims at particular set of goals. And we are always talking about particular institutional contexts. Every school, every institution has their own rules, has their own contexts. And even the classrooms in the same institution, they can have different rules inside them. And also particularity is a goal and at the same time a process. And to conclude with particularity, we can say that there is no generic set of theoretical principles and a generic set of classroom practices. Because, once more, every time a teacher enters a classroom, everything can change according to their group of students. So particularity is a goal and a process at the same time. A teacher works for the goals and through a particularity at the same time. It is a progressive advancement. And then we can talk about practicality. Practicality is about theory and practice, or theory of practice. Every time a teacher enters a classroom, he or she is theorizing their practice. They are thinking, they're reflecting of how they can set goals with their students, how can they approach their students, how they can treat their students as individuals. We can say that it is a teacher-generated theory of practice. So it comes from the classroom, it comes from the experience of teachers, and it is a continual reflection and action. And finally, the parameter of possibility. It is the relation of power and dominance. So Kuramavadivelu states that every classroom has their own rules. There is a relation of power among the students and between students and teacher. And it is the recognition of learners and teachers' subject positions. How is this relation being built in every classroom? We cannot say that it is the same in all these spaces that we work. Particularity is also related with the individual identity. When we talk about language classrooms, we also talk about how the individual or how the learner is building their identity inside a new language, how he or she is using this language. Is he or she able to bring their identity to the classroom? And here we also use English as an international language. English is known to be taught worldwide. And so English is not only taught in some places of the globe. And we think languages as a discourse. Don't think that the language is only grammar or linguistic content to be taught and learned, or only pronunciation to be improved. Pennycook and McCoy use this term myth of English. In other words, a standard English that can be taught all around the globe. English and language in general are socially and culturally constructed. So we are talking about this transnational context. During my PhD and Gustavo's master's degree studies, we were able to study the certificate program in the teaching of English as an international program, DTO, from the University of York in Toronto. It was a rare opportunity and face culture encounters. So we were Brazilians studying a group of students, and they were preparing themselves to become teachers, and they had the opportunity to teach English in Cuba at the University of Verona. So once more, we were Brazilians studying this group that came from Canada in Cuba. It was interesting to notice the native speaker role in that context. Once they arrived there, they were the center of some of the classes. So we could notice that coming from Canada was a privilege. And to complete this idea, we brought here Duffy, for instance, says teachers ethically affect students by the way they talk, the words they choose, and the truths they validate. So in that context, they were native speakers who read and studied about how the native speaker should not be the center of every English classroom. So they were trying to be careful the way they approached the Cuban students. So we brought this transnational context here as an example. When this detailed program happened, it was an in-person program. So the students traveled from Canada to Cuba in person to teach. After the pandemic, and now we are here to talk a little bit about the post-pandemic classroom. So the meetings among students from different countries, they can occur online. They could happen online, but During the pandemic, that was the only way students could meet. During the pandemic, these encounters, they could only happen online. They could have happened online before the pandemic. We had the means of doing that. But during the pandemic, that was the only way people could meet. But when the students hide themselves behind a computer, when they do not open the camera, or they open the camera but they are just a square on the screen, we have to think of equity, inclusion, diversity, how the transcultural connections can be made. And then we are here to raise some questions regarding this context. Are the students able to be themselves when they are just behind a screen? Is there inclusion in the classroom? And are the students able to use technology in a way that they can reach content? And how is the diversity among the students? Are they able to truly see each other even though they are a square on the screen? Is there real connection? We can say that the transcultural meetings, they can happen. It's easier to connect students from Canada to students in Brazil. They just need internet connection and a computer and they can meet. But is the connection really happening? It was very common in Brazil during the pandemic to hear teachers and professors complaining that their students would not participate in class, the students would not talk in class, and they would not turn on their cameras. So then we raised the question of how we can work equity, inclusion, diversity during the classes. And if we get the transcultural components, getting cultural encounters in the classroom, are they really happening just because we are connected from one end to the other with different countries? And how is the identity of the student being worked when they are hiding behind a screen? And now in this post-pandemic period, we can think of classroom and the use of technology. And then I bring here this term infodemic, that the World Health Organization states that it is too much information, including false and misleading information in digital and physical environments during a disease outbreak. The author, Byung-Chul Han, brings that infodemic is not only during a disease outbreak. The author Byung-Chul Han brings that infodemic does not only happen during a disease outbreak. This author relates the infodemic to democracy and how the democracy is endangered when people do not think and people do not reflect about the information they get. Han states that there is the lack of temporal stability, so people cannot take time with information, so they have access to too much information too fast. Time is a succession of punctual presents, which is related to duress of accelerated communication. So once more, this author connects this to democracy and how people are not reflecting when they are making their choices to vote. But here we can connect this to learning. When we are talking about the process of learning a new language and we think of the parameters of practicality, possibility, particularity, how are the students getting the information that they're learning? Are the students taking time to get information, study, and process what they are learning? We know that learning a language sometimes takes time, and sometimes students need to process what they're learning, connect what they're learning with the content, with their cultural experiences. When they're used to get information that must be quick, they do not stop to reflect on the information they are getting. And when they have this need to communicate too fast, how is this process of learning happening? Maybe we can say that this is a post-pandemic consequence that we live in. So students and teachers had to use technology. The technology helped many language teachers to get the transnational context inside their classrooms because it was easier to get contact with people from other countries. But this use of technology also accelerated the access to information. Students are not thinking about information they're having access. And how is this connection happening? Are the parameters from Cura Maravilha de Velo really happening in the classroom when the classrooms are happening only online? Are the teachers able to get to their students and really know their students to know the way that they can work with them once they do not open cameras or once they do not talk or when they don't even talk in classes? And now that the students are back to in-person meetings in classrooms, is there a change in their behavior when they get the information? And here we are to raise more questions about this post-pandemic context in classrooms, reflect even more about the use of technology in classrooms and how the mandatory use of technology affect the teachers and the students now that they can go back to classrooms in person. Muito obrigada.